I'm going to ask you to grab some sketch paper and your favorite pencil. Now, usually, some of the drawings we're going to do in this section, it's going to be mostly just exercising our drawing motions, I call it range of motion, where we focus mostly. Let me just grab my pencil here. Here we are. So I'm going to be working with a number 2 pencil. This is a 2B. And what I want you to do is really just focus on one major thing. If you haven't been in my classes before, I really, really push this as one of the major things that you should focus on, which is your grip, the way you hold the instrument. I truly believe it makes all of the difference. And for some of you who have never done this before, it may feel so awkward. You just gotta give it a chance. So what do I mean by this? Your instrument, this pencil, has a way of holding it. And for the longest time, you may have gone like this. And you're drawing with a writing grip. So you're holding it the way you were taught to use the instrument for writing. And notice that you're using a lot of finger, not a lot of wrist, and definitely not a lot of elbow or shoulder. So what I suggest is this. Test it out. You're going to place your pencil on your index finger and then just hold it with your thumb, just like this. Now your index finger could be below or above. That's the underhand grip, overhand grip. And you're going to notice immediately that you could, just with a little flick of the finger, you could go across the page. But also you can begin to see how the range of motion, where we deal with vertical, diagonal, horizontal lines, all different, circular, which is what we're about to do now. So the first thing I want you to do is grab a piece of paper, just like I have it here. And I do have an image, and it's the face, basically. It's a structure of a face, how to see the volume of a head and focus on the face, where what I want to do is begin to just get the motion with that grip and see it as the absolute simplest form possible. So the biggest thing I see here, and I'm going to go ahead and do this a little bit faster, I would pretty much start with a circle. Notice how I'm ghosting it. So ghosting it means I could just make the motion. You don't hear any sound. But as soon as I touch my pencil to the paper, there's very little pressure. My pressure comes from here, how hard I squeeze, or also how close I hold it to the tip. So I could apply a lot of pressure, that's going to make it dark. But the longer I hold it and the less pressure I have on it, almost to the point where it feels like it's going to fall off my fingers, I could ghost it so I could see the size on the paper. And little by little, I could apply just a little more pressure, but I could manage pressure and I could also manage pace. So you begin to see my circle coming a lot, it's kind of developing little by little. And then from that simple circle form, I want to begin to look at how do I make this circle an egg. So I'm going to elongate the bottom. And now notice how I'm ghosting it. So what you're doing here mostly is practicing the way you visualize the shapes that you're about to draw with the proper grip. I like to mention too that when you grab a hammer, when you have a hammer, you're going to use a hammer, you hold the hammer in a certain way, which is efficient. You don't hold the hammer like this to try to hammer like this. It's inefficient. You hold the hammer like this. So when you begin to use this grip or a modification, you could sometimes modify. I've seen modifications of these grips where you just index, thumb, and then just one extra finger or all 4 of them. And you can, just kind of get a sense of how it fits better in terms of how much pressure and what your pace. Also the way your posture, the way I'm working at an angle here. This is 45 degrees. It's not flat. So if I were to bring this down here, it would be flat. I would have to rearrange my posture, maybe stand up. That way I have my full, and you'll see a lot of artists doing that, working on an easel, standing up. So let's go back to our egg shape here. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the egg shape that is going to be It'll come back. But today we're going to go right from this quick exercise. So notice how my egg, and it could be a lot cleaner. I could add a little more conviction to the final line. So when I begin to see the full shape, I can actually darken it a little bit more so you see it. So there it is. Now what I want to do here is I want to estimate where the middle of it. So if this is the top, this is the bottom, and I take a measurement right over here on the side, I want to find the middle, and the middle should be right about here. So I could actually measure that with my pencil or with my fingers. There it is. Look at that. So half, the half point would be right here. And this point, I'm going to notice that it's not straight. I'm actually giving it a little bit of a curve. And this is going to be my eye line. Believe it or not, our facial features only cover half, the bottom half from the eyebrow lower and the lower part. Everything else is cranial mass. And usually that is one of the biggest things, one of the biggest problems we have with drawing our portraits. Our eye line tends to be way higher. And this is too flat or too squeezed in. And the same goes for the side. So once I have this measurement here, I'm going to find the second, which is now the middle. And this is just one quick, very, very popular form of finding your proportions. So I take the whole thing and I divide it in half. Then I'm going to take that bottom half and I'm going to divide it in half again. So I find the middle of it right about there. And I divide that into half. And then this bottom quarter, I'm going to divide it into thirds. And just draw those lines right in there. Notice that they're very loose, they're very light. So now, you're going to have to help me here with visualization. So if I'm looking straight forward, my center line would be here. But notice that the thing we're drawing is looking away and away. So if we were to draw a line right through the middle of the eyebrows, down through the middle of the nose, and right down through the middle of the lips, you would see that it would come to be somewhere in here. Right about there, I would say. So one big tip is when the tip of the nose goes beyond the line. Notice that here we see the other cheekbone, so it should be right about there. And that tips you to where this should be, depending on the size of your figure there. All right, now going by this figure that I have on screen, what I want you to see is how can I develop from these wire structures all the other circles here. So big one. We have two that would almost line up right here. Now, those would be the ocular cavities. Now, how high or how low? Notice that I'm putting it kind of just above middle. And I'm going to make sure that I have 1, 2, and the third. So the size of this one, because it's further away, it's going to look smaller. Then I'm going to make a second one there. And then my third one right about there. So this one, because it's closer to us, it looks like as if it were a little bit bigger. But you could play with that size. So I see that one. Then I see one up here that goes just about to the front, and it would kind of identify the forehead. Notice how I'm very loosely just drawing that in. You may see a curvature, a line that is curved just like that eyebrow. And what else? Big one right here. So right aligning with the edge of this eye, I see one that goes kind of oval sideways. So it would be sort of a lateral. Think of it as one side of a cube. And we could actually take this all the way and begin to just, wow, it's beginning to look, well, kind of like a robot, one of those futuristic robots. But I could begin to see that, yeah, it develops as a head, somewhat. Now notice there's a line, very important one here. So when I come, some of these begin to want to become detailed. What I want to do is find this one, that measurement that we divided here in halves. So the second one here. And that's going to be, let's just do it as a circle all the way. I know you see something that is a little more squarish or cubical, but let's all do it as a circle just for now. And that is going to be the bottom side of the nose that then runs. Notice there's a little bit of a curve. So it's not a full circle, but it kind of curves upward. And at the same time, if I were to continue that full circle, it would be in this direction. So it gives me the top side of the nose. As they cross here, you have areas that cross. And where is that coming from? Well, it would be the side of the nose. So there's a line here that would, if you were to keep it going across, it would cross and create this X or axis right on the other side. And we would see that coming from the other side as well, just over. So you begin to see how some fragments and sides, I could align this with a little bit, again, looking for sides of or segments of a curved line. And we begin to see also that it little by little, it's more and more evident. So my nose lines up here. We could even add smaller circles as nostrils here. Here's one big one that I'm going to emphasize. Goes right here from the corner of the eye or just a little bit to the side. And matter of fact, let me step back because I don't want to confuse this. Let's work in order. So find these first. This one. This, we divided into segments of thirds. It should be your upper lip or the middle opening of your lip. So I'm just going to add, it is a curved line. Notice how very, very light curve I'm adding there. And from there, I'm going to find just the width or the thickness. And you could always do this, and we'll see this in later stages, as smaller circles, the thickness of the lip. But what I really want to find is right there, the corners of that mouth. Usually it lines up right underneath the eye, right with your pupil sometimes. So it would land here and right there if you were to draw straight lines. And from here, we see this round. And there's a lot of muscle that we can actually see. When we look at a person, when we look at a portrait, we see all of these. And we begin to see, what I want you to do is, next time you actually look at a face or a portrait, I want you to find these curves, find these alignments, find the spaces, and let's look at this one here, that chin, and simplify it. Begin to simplify it into smaller combinations that actually give you more clues before you actually really need to begin to focus into detail. So here's that last one that I was talking about. Now that I have the corner of the mouth and I have this lateral side of my egg, I'm going to take this one, and this is the one that most of the time gives you all the likeness in your portraits. It's what gives you that cheekbone. So it goes sometimes right into the top of the ear or right next to the eye. The distance between the edge of that ocular and the ocular cavity and that line, the cheekbone, should basically give you the structure, the basic structure, and almost all the likeness in your portrait. Now from here we can continue going. Now we're going to have a little bit of a jawline, and then the underside of our neck. Take the back side of the neck, and let's extend that muscle and then add a little bit of a curve. So now I'm just looking at the image, and I'm beginning to copy some of those lines just a little bit. So as far as thickness, notice that it's getting a little thicker, a little darker. And at this point, I would begin to focus on specifics, changes to those simplified basic forms that I was building on. And from here, we could then focus on building those things that make every single face unique. And let's put one last one here. That ear. There we have it. So just loosening up. I hope you practiced. It basically was an excuse to just drop some lines while using this grip, because it is with this grip that I want you to mostly really begin to feel what it's supposed to feel like when you draw. To actually have that range of motion, that management of pressure, which we're going to really use in this workshop, and begin to gain some of that control. Okay, let's go to image number 2. So we are going to break this down into different aspects of the face, and we're going to start with number 1, the eye. So I'm going to just flip this page over. One thing that I really want you to really catch yourself with the grip. If you go back and it's just, sometimes you don't catch until minutes later. Oh, since I can't see you, and I wish I could, catch yourself really focusing. It probably, if you've never done it before, it feels like trying to open your door with, if you're right-handed, with the keys in your left hand, or brushing your teeth with your left hand if you're right-handed. Same goes for left-handed people if it's brushing your teeth with your right hand. This, usually, if you give it time and practice, you're going to get there. So 2 things I want to cover really, really quick. Basic structure. So we're going to try to develop the sight, or the major or simplified lines, the structure of an eye. Now, we all know that an eye, I hope you look at my page. I don't want to just copy this. I want to give you just a few and a couple of big tips, maybe 2 or 3, where one of them is, we know that the eye is, I'm actually going to make this bigger. I don't want to do it step by step, so apologies for that. I'm going to make this one bigger. So we all know that the eye is a ball, the eyeball. So I want to somehow see that in my drawing. And it's not necessarily the first thing. I hope you could see it. It's a little light because one of my rules, it's not mine, but the rules that I follow, you work biggest to smallest, you work simplest to more complex, and you always work light to dark. So the one thing I want to see is just where it would fit. How big is it going to be on my page? So I start with the eyeball. And I know that this eyeball is going to have another circle inside, which would be the iris, which has another little circle inside, which is the pupil. But I don't want to get there so far. I don't want to go that far that quick. What I want to do is I want to kind of start with a circle, my eyeball, and it's not a ball yet, and then begin to understand how everything else works. Now, I'm going to do this just a little rough so you guys can see where we're going. Now, there are some really, really important lines that you should follow. This one covers an angle. You're going to follow an angle. And I want you to see it first. So I'm looking at the top, and there's an angle to this line, which is, it's not horizontal. It's definitely not vertical. So catching this angle, and I'm talking about this area of a line that crosses the eye. Now there's going to be some curve to it eventually, but for right now, what I want you to do is start here. Now when we get to the edge, and I'm going a little bit beyond where I should go, because we have somewhat of a shape that would define where we drop and become a curve. And now going through the bottom, it goes finding the opposite angle and then where it curves. So here's the shape that I want you to find. So this is going left to right in the upwards angle. Then we have a drop that goes in the opposite. Now notice that there's 2 segments here, 1, 2. I'm just making it 1. And I'm going to add just a bit of curve. I could make this just to make the point a little bit more squarish, sort of a broken square here. So this is the basic fundamental shape that you want to find in order to develop your eye. And notice how this rounds and these two lines come together right at the edge of the eyeball. So it would actually curve upwards and right into this line, the smaller line, as we have this one going across in an upward direction and then dropping. And notice that there's some space here. Guess what that's going to be? There's a little space between these two lines intersecting all the way here. And everyone knows what this is going to be, the tear duct and that area. So setting this up for your drawing is absolutely key. And that's what this first step is it's trying to do. So if you follow those 6 steps in what you see on screen now at the top left, and then you harden those lines, and then it gets into shading. I wish you could see it this way first. How some of these lines become super important to set up before you develop all of the other ones. Now I'm going to erase some of these edges here. And as I mentioned earlier, I made this a little too harsh just to make a point. But these lines should begin to have just a little bit of curvature. As you're looking at your subject, you're going to see how they overlap, how sometimes they curve in or over, because every eye is completely different. Sometimes a person has 2 eyes that look a little bit different, the left from the right. And how all of this would line up. Now, remember that original circle that I had here? That eyeball? The top of it should hint at what's happening with my eyelid. So I'm going to add just a line that goes, it folds either in or over just a little bit, creating this upper eyelid. And here at the bottom, we have a little bit of skin that goes, and sometimes you can actually feel it. And if you didn't have a good night's sleep, you could actually, it gets a little darker. Where we also have the lower eyelid as it curves. And that's how I would begin to develop. Let's clean this up just a little bit more. And just clean up a little bit of sharpness from that. I'm going to erase just a little bit because, as I mentioned, these should have been a lot lighter. We begin to look at our subject and we see how this curves in and this overlaps. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it looks like they meet just at the edge and come together into one. But here I want to make this eyelid somewhat look the same as this reference and just go out. So this is overlapping the lower one and then it goes outwards just a little bit. And my eyelid comes just at the edge of that eyeball. On this end, you see that the eyeball would continue right in here. And then we have a darkening, the cavity, that takes us right into the ear duct, the tear duct here, creating a little bit of a darker area, usually, depending on the lighting, just like we have here. And reinforcing this one at the bottom. Now, one thing that I did not show you in the original setup of these lines, I'm going to thin this just a little bit more too, because we're going to begin to see it and we'll see it clearer in the next exercise. It's the thickness of this layer of skin. So if you follow from stage 2, you begin to see a line underneath that second line that goes just over the edge of the iris. Whatever thickness you give to this layer of skin is what's going to really, really give your eye more of a realistic look. Now, obviously, with the lighting that we'll bring in just a few minutes, all of that comes together. I'll explain how. We sometimes forget that because we're working with lines, that we're creating an illusion. And that illusion works how we manage certain fundamentals of art, in this case, lighting. So the thickness of this, working with light, you're going to see that there's a little bit of shadow right above it. And there's a variation of shadow which is darker right underneath. Meaning the light is coming from this direction. We see lighter. We definitely see a big area of light right here under the eyebrow. So all of this area is light. It gets a little bit darker right underneath. Right underneath this area of the eyebrow. And then we get back to light with the little darker shadow and then full or darkest shadow right in here. Now this is going to cast a little bit of shadow right into the eyeball as well. And if you could see it up close, you'll see that it's just a little layer of hashing right there. And it goes all the way through and it rounds the way it would on a ball. And a good way to practice all of these is remembering that you're dealing with a ball and how light works on an actual sphere. And we're going to see that once again inside the eye. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit clearer here. What I had as my iris, make it a little bit bigger than I had it before. So general tip, measuring the iris, unless my subject, I want to make it look really scared. It covers just about a third. Comparing the size of the full eyeball to the area of the iris, it's about 1/3. And then the pupil, depending on how dilated it could be. Notice that I'm going to leave a little area of light. I'm going to go ahead and make this just a little darker in there. Remember, we work from lightest to dark, but just so you could see it on screen. See how it's coming together? Working with small areas of shading. One of the biggest tips that I wanted to show, and I'm going to kind of ruin my drawing now. You should continue. You should continue the way you are if you're following the steps on screen to find, again, the thickness, just like we did here at the top. Think of it as the thickness of that layer of skin. Here at the bottom, you also have to see it. You have that thickness of that lower eyelid. And right at the edge of it, you're going to see some eyelashes, and you'll see them at the top too. That's finishing details, finishing touches. We'll deal with that just in a bit. But that combination of lines, which is going to create the illusion of three-dimensionality. It's the thickness of these lines. And again, this one is a little too dark from that earlier setup. So you want to develop these slowly with light lines, hopefully using the grip, practicing this grip, seeing which lines are giving you a little more trouble, but you should feel like you're just sketching for fun. Really practicing, working out this new grip. And if it is your artist grip, then really pushing yourself a little bit further. How? Well, hold it longer. Are you used to drawing with a longer grip where you can actually, well, it slows it down because the pressure on the line is so much lighter. So you have to build much slower. But it is the best way to really control your values, your light lines, and build up patiently. Also, you can manage your pace. So I'm going to erase just a little bit and clean up this, which I made too exaggerated. And why not? Let's go ahead and add the iris. Darker at the top, and I'll explain why. Same reason we have the sphere catching light coming in this direction, covered by this area. It's going to cast shadow, as you can see here, and it's going to be darker here at the top, and then light coming right through in the middle of the eye and becoming just a little bit lighter. Now, how you deal with reflections? Easy. You just manage the shape. Sometimes you can actually see the scene reflected in an eye, depending on the quality of your image or the quality of your model. If you look really, really close, what you see is yourself reflected there. And the windows or the room behind you. So this area is going to be a little bit lighter. I could actually break some of the lines, so I'm playing with different kinds of strokes. Notice how with this grip, I rotate the pencil as I draw some of these lines. So they're not always the same zigzagged lines. I want to really push this grip and think of it as a symphony, as an orchestra. All the different sounds, all the different qualities of line that you could create from it. And notice that it is you who really is in control. In control of what? The quality of the line, the combination of the lines, but most importantly, the value of those lines. The lightness and the darkness, the combination, and understanding how light works. So we have the light coming from above. It means here, lighter. As it rounds away, it's going to get darker, away from the light. As it comes towards a little bit of open area, it gets lighter. So with my grip, I could hold it a little longer. Begin to shade it in. Now for some of these drawings, I would recommend, if you have it, a tool for blending is always great. Areas like this, where you could blend the graphite, and if you want to make these drawings a little more realistic, you would use not your finger. The oils in your finger are going to ruin your graphite. And you want to just blend it in, give it a little more body, a little more shape. I don't like over blending because it makes everything look just a little dulled out. You lose the qualities of those beautiful lines. But smoothing it out and then layering it again very strategically is, for most of us, the look that we want for our drawings. Now, how do I make this skin look like it's really wrapping in and under? Well, with a lot of patience and a little bit of layering, darker and then lighter combinations. So notice that I'm doing sort of circular, like a lot of little letter O's or figure eights. As we get a little darker as we go in. Now the other way would be to switch to the next pencil. So if I was working with an HB, I would go to a 2B. If I was working with a 2B, I would go to a 4B. Some of you may be asking, what does that mean? Well, we have different pencils with different letters and numbers, if you've ever seen them. If you have the letter H on them, that means hard, and it means light. If it has the letter B, it means soft and black. The higher the number, the blacker, or the harder the pencil. So if you have a 6H, that's really hard, harder than a 2H. If you have a 2B and compare it to a 6B, you will immediately feel the difference. And here, for example, I have an 8B. Notice how dark these strokes are going to get in here. Which is how you would manage your way through a drawing. Through managing the pressure, the level of darkness that you want to add to your drawings. And there we go. So, and it would continue. You would develop all the other different areas of your drawing. And little by little, just bring it together. So, the thickness that you can develop in this layer of skin and this layer of skin. And also, notice what we started with. We started with a line that went like this. I'm using red pencil here. We started with a line that went like this and one that went right here like this. And one that curved down into it like this. And one that went, remember I added a little one here, but one that goes up into this one, just like this. So what you're looking for is basically this somewhere near this shape. And if you notice where these lines connect, so here and here, you begin to have an angle. And sometimes that angle is like this, or sometimes a little more like this. And I just went over it. But you will absolutely see it in the next image. So here we are. Moving to exercise number 2. Actually, exercise number 3. One of the major tips that I'm going to give you here is this one. There is a very, very important line. Just like this one that I mentioned here, I want to point out another one, and it's this one. So I'm actually going to go to a new page where we will develop it, but the line that I'm looking for is this one. Something like this. Now I'm really exaggerating it here. And where does that line, what is he looking at? You may be asking. That line is this one. So I'm looking for the ball. There's my eyeball. And the line that I'm looking for is when I draw a portrait in profile. Once I see my eyeball, the line that I want to identify is this one. What line is that? Well, it's a line, notice, just like in the drawing. We go somewhere just past halfway, not half, not past a quarter or 3/4. It's just right about here. And it goes upward, somewhat, just with a little bit of a curve, and it goes out past the actual eyeball, just outside of it, right here. And then we have that same one, that same spot, going downward. So see what's happening here? These 2 points where I can actually see that thickness that I was talking about earlier, and that thickness that will develop down here. Those 2 points are going to, just like that. Here's the end of the top of our eyeball. Here at the bottom, you begin to see the curving as well. And then we have, just for fun right there, the iris. And sideways, the pupil looks a little more like an oval. In perspective, it's not a full circle. Sometimes you have a little bit of bulging here at depending on how much profile you're looking at that eye. But this line, the angle between the top eyelid and the bottom eyelid, and the thickness of those layers of skin is, and here's a little bit of that overlapping, the main thing you need to figure out and focus on. And from here, you just build your portrait. Everything else from here on out becomes making sure you see some of those lines and then develop the light. So let's go ahead and do that. But this line right here is going to be your key. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to show you where we're going just ahead of where we are now. So we are here, and then we're going to develop this into this. So we're working in stages, and this one we're going to develop just a little bit further. Now these lines I just showed you, I'm going to start once again with ghosting. Notice my grip. Number one, my grip. I want to see how big am I going to make this eye. Not too big, right about here. So I want to see. Now I want to leave more space to this side. So because there's going to be a forehead and a nose here. So I want to see that, visualize it. And then I just size it, ghost it in, and very, very lightly, just kind of give myself a point to start, something to work off of. There we are. So number two, you can actually measure this by placing your pencil over your eye, and that's just checking the angle. Or you could place it right over your reference photo and finding that angle. Very crucial to find that angle. In this case, it's like this right here. So notice that my pencil, if I were to draw just a little line, giving me a clue, I want to make sure I see it. So I'm penciling it in here. And you could actually see it right there. Right there. Not straight up and down. The more angle you take away or add to it, everything's going to shift. And right at the tangent point of the circle here, of what will be my eyeball, now, going back to my model, I'm going to find those points where they meet the line, make a measurement here, which should be, remember, it's not in the center, it's a little bit lower, and it's a little bit further than center towards the back. And you can actually measure these as well, measuring the angle of that top eyelid, if the eye's more closed or if it's more open. But you want to have a good sense, that's about it. And this point where we take that just a little bit of curve to it, and then the bottom angle. From that same point and downwards. Now, how do I build that thickness? Well, you have to think in 3D, just a little bit in 3D. This here is going to be the area of the eyeball that we see. Now that is going to be curved and wrapped around by the inner layer of skin. This is going to go over. And the thickness of that layer of skin, remember, I can make it really thin or really thick. You want to make sure you have something that gives it just that bit of realism. And notice how as it pulls towards the corner, it becomes a little bit thinner. Because from our perspective, we see less of it. Now, the more eye level we are with this, the less we're going to see. If we were looking down at it, we wouldn't see any of it. We would see more of this one. But if we're looking from underneath, we would definitely see lots of this one, the thickness from below, none of this one. I hope that made sense. It's just the perspective from which you're looking at your subject. And once again, going outside of it, I'm going to add just a little bit of that thickness. And this one I'm going to bring just to the edge and kind of like taper it off. It doesn't meet. So this angle tip, finding that line, that angle that you don't necessarily see, but you have to find in order to set the pose, set the subject up, seeing that angle, and then seeing and illustrating the thickness of these combined areas of the eye. Probably the two biggest tips that I'm going to give you today, other than the grip, using the right grip, and then developing the light. So here we now can begin to draw. Well, if what we were doing before wasn't drawing, we were engineering it a little bit. giving ourselves a way to be successful by setting up the foundation, a good solid foundation for the drawing. Now we could ruin that easily, so you want to stay patient. And now read the angles and develop it slowly. And how do we do that? Reading the angles, finding relationships. Remember, the bottom of the eye is going to give me that lower angle of the lower eyelid. This, we know, goes right into the cheekbone. And it's just a line that I'm going to add there. I added a little extra angle. Let's go back to the top. And here we're going to find a measurement that I need to see. How thick, how far in relationship to this, what is the thickness that I need to find here? So there's an easy way for us to measure that. And we can measure it against a unit. So for example, the opening of the eye, my eye is this thick, or it's this length. That is almost 1 1/4 times the thickness that I need to find. So from here, that is almost 1 1/4. So it would be right here. And just giving myself that little point there, I can actually just, like we did earlier with those curves, I could just kind of suggest them. We want to find that this is the nasal. Well, we're going to find the nasal bone in here, some cartilage, and then the upper, I like to call this the keystone, where we meet the eyebrow and then the forehead. So the angles of these, I'm just going to keep a little straighter and very nice and loose. Where my area is going to be, my area of focus is going to be mostly what happens here in the eye. So now that I have this, I can find where this combination of lines, right in here, so this one first, you could find that angle. I'm measuring it and seeing it, and it goes right through. So remember, looseness first, and you could check it. No, that's a little bit off. Erase it. Try it again. But I think I got it. So ghosting it, and then seeing it through, and seeing it all the way through is the way to go. Notice that there's a combination of lines here that goes, if I were to extend it, I want to see where it would cross. So I could go from here, check the angle if you need to. I just do it by placing my pencil over my reference, bringing it straight over. And that may shift a little, but it's close enough where I could see it. And now here, I can begin building. There's a major line we're missing here, which I think it goes a little bit curved up and then away, and it's this one, where this meets, begins to fall, so my upper eyelid. And it's going to be a major area of work. Let's go ahead and do that iris. So it meets right at the bottom. And it rounds, and we don't see the edge of the top of the circle, which would be right about here with the upper eyelid, which is usually the case, unless you're looking up. And then we have a little, sort of like the cornea here. And then that pupil, the placement of the pupil and the way you draw that ellipse. Because it's not, we're looking at it from the side. So we're going to see a perfect circle in perspective, which becomes this little ellipse right there. And there we have it. I guess if I were to show this to 10 people, 9 out of 10 would say, well, it's a human's eye. At least we could see that it's getting there. And I think from here, I have the structure, the lines that I was looking for, just enough to take it to the next image. So from here, whoa, how did we get there? Well, this is what usually we would be looking at in order to deconstruct and try to get this before we attempt to go there. How do we get from here to there? Well, the idea actually is, how do we get here from there? Now, rendering is the easy part. What do I mean by rendering? We're going to look for the darkest areas and begin to build them up. So from lightest to darkest, in terms of lines, I'm going to maintain the same pencil. And sometimes when we get caught up in the detail, that's where we lose it. So what do I want to do? What I want to do here is squint. If I squint, I begin to see these simplified shapes of dark shapes and light shapes. So I see this biggest, where would be the darkest shape? When I squint, the biggest, darkest shape I see goes from here. And what I want to do is see a shape, not make it up. So what shape is that darkest thing I see? It goes here, and then it kind of goes right into here. And because I have those lines, that structure, I hope you guys could see it, and I hope you're following with me. If that's not the one you see it somewhere else, then just go with that. But I'm just making very light lines. I don't want to darken it all the way right away. I want to go light and patient as long as possible. But would you agree? Do you see the same thing I'm seeing here? Just a little bit? That darkest shape? So when I say squint, I mean squint right through your eyelashes, where you simplify the information into almost blurred black and white shapes. And this one that I see here starts looking like it. And maybe it goes a little bit further, but I just want to focus on this area where it will get darker little by little, little by little, as I continue layering. Yes, there's another shape that goes, and it's dark, and it goes in here, but it's more linear. When you talk about shape, that's where I don't want to cheat and get ahead of it. Now there's other areas of really dark shapes. Now, instead of looking at the whole eye, I want to simplify that, and I want to see there's almost like a rectangle of really dark, and that would be the cast shadow of it. So handling your grip, realizing which is the best posture, what is the best grip. I'm sorry, not grip, but direction of lines that I need to bring this. As I continue squinting, we kind of lose a little bit of that thickness, the lines that we were doing there, but they'll come into play when we develop just a little later. All what we would call the details, because these would count as those darkest shapes as well, but I don't want to put them in yet. They're too linear. I'm looking for bigger masses, and obviously this would be one. Now they get smaller. Remember, I started with the biggest, and now I'm going into the smallest areas. But still looking for darkest and just beginning to build it up. So the rendering of it becomes, well, I did the darkest areas. There's a few extra over here. And instead of thinking of eyelash or eyebrow, or just think of what shape is that? And actually, if you could see, oh, look, it looks kind of like a dragon or a unicorn or a dolphin jumping out of the water. Anything other than eyelash, which makes you draw something that's not there. Usually when we see something and we try to draw that thing, we add information, the symbols of what we think it looks like, instead of what actually is there. So avoiding naming the thing and actually deconstructing, just like we did with finding the lines. We want to find shapes. We want to find ways of breaking it down and then piecing it back together like a puzzle. Okay, so I went with the darkest. Now I'm going to add shadow. So I see a bigger, not the darkest, but now I'm going into, and I should make an effort to, when I go over this area, make sure it's darker. Notice how I'm holding the pencil little by little. I'm losing it. I'm actually holding it longer. So these lines also have a direction. So here, I'm going somewhat in a diagonal way. But what I'm drawing in is all the shadow. So it's a whole big shadow shape. And I see it. I see the edges. And it's almost, in a sense, like coloring it in, really. Now you could do this by switching pencils. What I did is started with the shape. I have points where I could refer to. Notice here how it gets and reaches right at the edge of the eye. And then that shape has an angle. And then, whether I see it as an inverted mountain that has a little curve and gets really a touch of darker right at the edge. And then you come to realize, what I am doing this entire time, what we call drawing, it's actually really an exercise in observation. How do you see the thing you're drawing? So these shapes, we are all using the same reference, and somehow we all come with variations of the thing because we all see it differently. We focus on different areas, different lines. Some of us have a little more patience. So continue finding shapes, and as far as you go, all the way through, you simplify into smaller and smaller, more complex shapes. And those shapes have either a very light, a grayish, or a dark value. So you just try to replicate that. So I'm adding a little bit of the shading or the shape. Notice that it gets a lot darker here. And when I begin to add that contrast, I'm going to just bring some of these lines in the direction. So I'm following somewhat the contour and the curve, creating that extra illusion and maybe a little bit of texture too. See how the lines kind of break and you have some of that wrinkling of skin. I mentioned if you have one of these, great time to bring it out, soften some of this, begin to easily create a little more volume, soften the edges. One more thing I'm going to show you is, oops, I went too far with that thing, so I need to bring in light. So using an eraser, any type of eraser, and the ones I recommend are these. You either have your regular eraser, just like, what do they call these? Just a block eraser. This is a great one, which is Kneaded Eraser, and you can actually shape it, make it really pointy or like a ball, and just tap, tap, tap to lift some of that graphite and create textures as well. So notice how I brought some of that light right back in there. Or these that I've been using a little more frequently now, the Mono Zero, which is just like a pencil eraser with a tiny tip where you can actually really draw light right back in. And I like it because you can create breaks and textures with a little more hardness. Notice what's happening here. And it is literally drawing light right back into your composition. So those three things, and also switching pencils. If you have the ability, if you have the different pencils, I'm switching to a 4B. I was working with a 2B and going into the second layer without pressure. Sometimes we think, oh, I got to make it darker, so I'm going to just press harder. No, what you want to do is maintain the same pressure, switch pencil, and let the pencil do the job. Notice here, light pressure, and I want to build that up just a little bit. As I mentioned, this is an area where it makes or breaks your drawing. The contrast between this and how the other lines will combine is what makes this drawing come together. So for example, a little bit of harsher, heavier contrast here really creates a great sense of light. So what am I doing? I'm really, again, squinting is your best friend. Really simplifying the way you see it until it becomes line. Sometimes it doesn't become line, but very, very close to it. Combining some of the looseness of that line with different pencil strokes. Notice I'm doing a little more vertical and getting away from that really harsh contour line that we always look for, where it gives us that cartoonish look. And if you don't know what I mean, is I have to just draw the edge of everything. No, let it blend in. And knowing how to control contrast and edges is actually the way you really push your drawings to a whole new level. And as I said, once things become more linear, so a lot of these shapes we feel like, well, they're lines. No, treat them as smaller and smaller shapes and see them in 3D. The more you, again, exercise in observation, the closer you get to simplifying even the most complex part and coming up with a way. So I'm looking for a 6B here so I can go just a little bit faster. And again, you don't want to go faster. Just adding heavier graphite. And some of these are going to be really just, how do I capture that shape? Well, patience. So far you've been ghosting, so you could do that. Immediately you see how building it up, bringing it this far along, and it slows down. It slows down a lot as you're reaching that finishing, those finishing touches. You slow down your drawing, you slow down your lines, you check them a little bit closer. The pressure becomes less and less. The idea to have to capture a single line perfectly adds a little more stress sometimes, but remember, if you maintain somewhat of a sketching mindset, you'll find yourself having more and more success. And also checking your level of patience, how you're managing the pace, the pressure, the buildup, the grip, the direction. But overall, what are you looking at? How are you simplifying it? Now there's also a thing that as you begin to get darker and darker, you could get too dark. So managing how you build up the level of darkness that you're adding to your drawing. How dark is too dark? Sometimes it's better off to see the darkest, just like I did when I built up the early on stage of my darkest shape, and little by little letting it slowly come together. I really want to get into this area here so I get smaller, less pressure. As the graphite gets darker, it also gets way easier to, I don't want to say ruin it, but smudge it very easily. So I'm going to move back and forth from a 4B to 8B as I push some of these values here that it seems like they're getting really dark all over, but I want a little bit of break between them. So I'm working underneath the actual eyeball and a little curving and light within it. And what I mentioned is the sharpness of the line and the darkness of the line really play a big factor, a big effect on how it all comes together in the end. So here we have a little bit of light to play with, and I'm not too worried because I could bring it out. How? Like this. Just draw it back in. And just add a little extra texture, dabbing. I could do a little bit up here as well. And then layer that in. So doing a little bit of back and forth, and you're going to find that you will come up with your own recipe, your own technique, your own style. And the one thing I would recommend is don't overdo it. No matter what, always favor the side of less. Less is more, simplicity. How heavy, and in terms of line. And I'm going to find one more right here just to add some of these final lines. So we are getting very linear here. Hard to maintain consistency and pressure. But I want some of that texture and almost one and done kind of strokes where it's just, you could see, yeah, it's supposed to be an eyelash. I want to capture the direction, the darkness, the value of it, all in one without overthinking it. Sometimes if you overthink it just a little too much, it doesn't come through. As easy as, obviously there's the counter of, well, if you're taking it too casual, then it doesn't look like you want it either. So it's that just getting a good sense of how relaxed and not too relaxed, which is what makes things, not just in drawing, but even in life, how serious, how not too serious, but serious enough where it's not just a joke. And then you find yourself having fun and realizing, well, actually, that's what it's all about. And then you end up with something beautiful and realize that what was amazing was the time you just spent exercising your artistic sense, your level of observation, how you could see everything that's amazing around you. And it is all the process. It was all about the process. And sometimes, hopefully every time, discovering something new. And there we have it. Well, this came out nice, I think. For a sketch, it looks great. Next week, we'll look at nose. Week after that, we'll look at mouth. And then we're going to put it all together. But overall, just to go the major steps, find those lines. And sometimes they're not evident. You have to see them. So remember this one. Remember this one. Knowing where to see it and how to set everything up, and have the patience to slowly develop it and let it basically come alive before your own eyes. Hope you guys enjoyed it.